Right now, Spirit is pulling your focus towards something most people don't notice until the damage is already done. And that's the quiet, nonstop warrior person is fighting inside themselves every single day. From the outside, it might look like they've moved on, like they picked someone else, like they built a life that has nothing to do with you anymore. But behind closed doors, their emotional world is cracking under pressure. What they're carrying is way heavier than they ever learned how to hold. They're forcing themselves to stand in a life that doesn't fit their soul, trying to breathe inside a situation that feels empty, acting fine, while their heart keeps pulling them back to you in ways they can't control or even explain. This isn't about loyalty anymore. It's not about right or wrong choices. It's about the brutal tension between the life they're living and the truth they feel in their chest. And that tension, it's getting louder by the day. If this already feels familiar, drop "I see the truth" in the comments. Spirit wants you to understand something important first. This situation did not start with a third person. That's just the visible part. The real beginning happened way earlier. The moment your person realized they didn't know how to sit with the depth of what they felt for you. From day one, this connection asked more of them than they were ready for. It demanded real emotional presence. No masks, no half answers, no escape routes. It asked for vulnerability without a safety net. And instead of rising to meet that, they pulled back, not because the feelings were weak, but because they were too strong. Loving you cracked open parts of them they had kept tightly locked for years. It exposed insecurities buried under responsibility, ego, routine, and survival mode. And when the emotions got intense, when feelings started asking for clarity, courage, and real decisions, they defaulted to what they've always done under pressure. They created distance, not healthy space. Emotional distance disguised as logic, detachment dressed up as maturity, silence labeled as control. Spirit shows that when they stepped away from you emotionally, they didn't step into peace. They stepped into noise, into a life that looks stable on the outside but feels hollow on the inside. The third person was never a replacement. They were a buffer, someone easier to manage, less emotionally demanding, less reflective. This wasn't about desire. It was about fear, a choice made by someone who didn't believe they were worthy of the depth they felt with you. And that belief, it still lives inside them. Every day, they try to convince themselves that what they have now is enough. They rehearse reasons, repeat mental scripts just to get through the day. But none of those stories reach the place where your name still echoes. Spirit shows them waking up with a contradiction they can't shake. On one hand, they're trying to perform commitment, normalcy, and emotional presence where they are. On the other, their emotional body refuses to cooperate. Their reactions are delayed. Their affection feels forced. Their energy pulls back randomly. They can't fully relax because part of them is constantly monitoring what they feel about you. Like if they stop paying attention for 1 second, the truth might spill out and blow everything up. That's why their behavior feels inconsistent. Present one moment, distant the next. Guilt leaking out in subtle ways they don't even recognize as guilt. This struggle you feel, it's real, it's active, and it's draining them. Spirit says this connection was never meant to be casual. It was designed to wake things up, to expose emotional patterns they could no longer ignore. And avoidance was never going to be a long-term solution. The more they suppress what they feel for you, the louder it gets. The more they try to look settled elsewhere, the more their inner world rebels. They thought time would soften it, thought distance would dilute it. Instead, absence sharpened everything. You didn't fade. You became clearer. And in the next part, Spirit goes even deeper into what's breaking down right now inside them, and why this phase is exhausting them more than they'll ever admit. If you felt their energy getting heavier instead of calmer, stay with me. Part 2 reveals why this is reaching a breaking point. Spirit is pulling this message deeper now, past surface confusion and into the place your person barely admits exists. What's happening inside them is no longer just uncertainty, it's confrontation. They're being forced to sit with an emotional truth they honestly believed they could outrun. For most of their life, they had a go-to survival strategy. When feelings got too intense, they created distance. When emotions demanded presence, they shut down. When something mattered too much, they backed away. And for a long time, that worked. But now, that strategy is failing. Silence doesn't calm their heart anymore. Distractions don't mute the pull. Routine doesn't numb the longing. In fact, every attempt they make to stabilize their current situation only highlights how misaligned it feels. The contrast between what they're living and what they feel is getting sharper, not softer. Spirit shows moments where they zone out mid-conversation. They stare into space. They react emotionally to things that shouldn't even matter. These aren't random mood swings. These are cracks. Cracks where suppressed truth is pushing through whether they like it or not. They're trying to show up normal, trying to be present where they are. But their emotional body keeps drifting somewhere else. They replay memories without meaning to. They feel your energy at the weirdest times, not as nostalgia, but as something unfinished that refuses to close. That's why their connection with the third person feels strained in a way they can't explain. It's not constant fighting. It's absence, a quiet lack of depth that no amount of effort can fake. Spirit says your person truly believed choosing an easier path would bring relief. They thought emotional intensity could be replaced with predictability, stability, or shared responsibilities. What they're learning now is that emotional truth doesn't work like that. It can't be substituted. It can only be faced or resisted. And resistance has a shelf life. The more they resist, the heavier it gets. The more they tell themselves they're content, the more their body responds with tension, irritability, and emotional burnout. There's a deep sense of inadequacy rising inside them, not because of you, but because of what loving you revealed. With you, they saw who they could be and who they were afraid they weren't ready to become. That awareness never left. It followed them into every decision after you. Whispered questions they didn't want to answer. Am I enough? Can I actually sustain something real? Am I brave enough to choose alignment over approval? Those questions are loud now. Spirit reveals that the third-party dynamic is exposing emotional truths your person hoped to avoid. Expectations are increasing. Emotional demands are growing. The early sense of ease is fading. And as that happens, your person becomes painfully aware of their emotional limitations. They feel pressure to show up in ways that feel unnatural. Guilt when they can't reciprocate depth. Fear around honesty and the consequences it would bring. This isn't peace. It's a slow emotional unraveling. But Spirit wants you to understand something important here. Awareness comes before action. Recognition comes before change. Right now, they're still processing, still sitting in discomfort, still bargaining with themselves, still hoping there's a way to fix this without blowing up the life they've built. But the internal dialogue is shifting. What once sounded like justification now sounds like doubt. What once felt manageable now feels exhausting. There's also grief in their energy, quiet grief. The kind that shows up when someone realizes they can't go back to who they were before a connection changed them. They grieve the version of themselves that felt safe in avoidance. They grieve the timing. They grieve the courage they didn't access when it mattered most. And here's the part Spirit wants you to notice. Your energy has changed. You've processed pain. You've learned how to exist without answers. You're no longer standing in the same emotional place. And your person feels that shift. They sense that you're no longer waiting in the same way, that you're no longer available to be pulled into confusion. That creates fear and respect, and that combo intensifies their internal struggle even more. Spirit says this connection is now operating beneath conscious thought. The less you chase, the more clarity moves closer. Alignment, not effort, is what's doing the work now. In next part, Spirit reveals the quiet turning point forming beneath all this, where denial starts collapsing and truth begins demanding a decision. Spirit shifts the energy now into the most vulnerable layer, the one your person rarely lets surface because it threatens the story they've been telling themselves. What's happening inside them isn't just discomfort anymore. It's the slow collapse of denial. They're starting to realize something they can't unsee. The life they chose out of fear cannot hold the version of themselves that's emerging now. This realization doesn't arrive like a dramatic breakdown. It shows up quietly, in pauses they can't explain, in moments where they realize no matter how much effort they put into looking settled, something inside them remains untouched, unmet, unresolved. They're beginning to understand the problem was never the intensity of the connection with you. The real issue was their emotional capacity at the time. They didn't know how to meet something real with integrity. Spirit shows them questioning patterns they once thought were normal. They're noticing how quickly they shut down when emotions get real, how instinctively they retreat into logic when feelings ask for presence, how often they choose familiarity over depth. That awareness is uncomfortable because it forces accountability. They can't blame timing anymore. They can't blame circumstances. They can't blame other people. They're seeing themselves clearly, and that clarity rattles them. It challenges the identity they built around being in control, reasonable, low drama. The truth is they've been emotionally overwhelmed for a long time, and instead of learning how to regulate that intensity, they learned how to avoid it. Now avoidance is failing. They feel it in their body. Constant tension, emotional heaviness, a sense of living someone else's life. This is why frustration hits out of nowhere, why irritability shows up without a clear cause, why they seem distant even when nothing is technically wrong. These aren't signs of peace. They're signs of resistance weakening. Spirit reveals that the third-party dynamic has shifted in a way your person didn't expect. What once felt like a refuge now feels like a responsibility. What once felt calm now feels restrictive. They feel watched, evaluated, expected to show up emotionally in ways they can't sustain. And instead of motivating them, that pressure highlights how disconnected they feel. They're realizing something big. Stability without emotional truth feels suffocating. That realization carries grief. Sometimes it looks like nostalgia, sometimes regret, sometimes a sudden emotional wave they can't explain. They're grieving the connection with you, but also grieving the version of themselves they could have become if they'd chosen courage when it mattered. They're grieving honesty. They're grieving timing. And they're grieving the fact that now that they see this, they can't unsee it. Awareness changes people permanently. Spirit wants you to understand that this unraveling isn't linear. There will be moments where they seem closer to truth, followed by moments where they double down on avoidance. That doesn't mean they're going backward. It means fear is reacting. Fear always gets loud before it loses control. They're stuck between wanting relief and fearing disruption, between longing for authenticity and clinging to what feels familiar. This inner tug of war is exhausting, and it's stripping away illusions one layer at a time. Now here's the part meant for you. You are no longer meant to participate in this confusion. Your growth has shifted the dynamic. You're holding your own clarity now, even if it came through pain. And that clarity acts like a mirror. Your person feels that you're no longer emotionally available for half-truths or mixed signals. That awareness creates tension for them, not panic, but respect. Because if they ever approach you again, it would require honesty, and they're still learning how to access that. Spirit emphasizes, you are not being asked to wait, hope, or predict outcomes. You're being asked to stay aligned with yourself. Emotional truth doesn't need force. It unfolds on its own timeline. The work happening now is internal. It's happening whether you see it or not. And it's happening because emotional avoidance has consequences. This isn't punishment. It's education. There's a quiet turning point forming beneath the surface. Not yet spoken, not yet acted on, but real. Your person is beginning to see that the life they chose out of fear doesn't match who they're becoming through awareness. And once a story loses its power, it can't fully hold someone anymore. Spirit asks you to stay grounded. Don't romanticize struggle. Don't assign timelines. Don't chase clarity. What's meant to shift will shift through alignment, not urgency, through truth, not pressure, through readiness, not longing. Some connections are catalysts, not comforts. They exist to awaken, not to soothe, and awakening is rarely gentle. If you felt this connection change you at a soul level, and you know you're no longer the same, right? I honor my clarity in the comments. What unfolds next depends on truth, not time. Right now, what's unfolding inside your person isn't about clear decisions yet. There are no final moves being made. What's happening is deeper than that. It's feelings, longings, inner visions that scare them because those visions demand change. They're starting to realize something uncomfortable. Staying where they are means continued emotional suppression. Choosing truth, on the other hand, means disruption, shaking things up, letting go of what feels familiar. Neither option feels easy, but only one feels real, and that realization is heavy. Spirit wants you to understand something important here. You are not meant to wait around for this awareness to fully mature. You're not meant to pause your life, hold your breath, or stay emotionally on standby. The work happening right now is not yours to manage. It's unfolding because emotional truth can't stay buried forever. Your person is learning this the hard way, through discomfort, through longing, through the quiet collapse of illusions they once relied on to feel safe. Spirit asks you to stay neutral, grounded, and self-honoring during this phase. Don't read silence as indifference. Don't mistake struggle for readiness. Everything has its own timing. And what's forming right now is internal clarity, not immediate action. This turning point isn't the finish line. It's the start of accountability. Emotional truth doesn't rush. It waits until someone is capable of holding it, and your person is still figuring out how. If this part resonates, right, I stay aligned with myself in the comments. Now Spirit moves this message into a more uncomfortable phase. The phase where awareness starts demanding consequences. Your person can no longer treat their emotions like abstract thoughts. What they feel is bleeding into daily life. They can't compartmentalize it anymore. The pressure they're under isn't coming from outside drama. It's coming from the realization that continuing as they are requires emotional dishonesty. And that dishonesty now has a cost. Avoidance doesn't feel neutral anymore. It feels heavy. Every interaction where they pretend to be present drains them. Every moment they silence their truth makes them feel smaller. This creates a kind of exhaustion that sleep doesn't fix. Spirit shows emotional dissonance setting in. A mismatch between who they present to the world and who they know they really are. They notice it in their tone, their reactions, their patience wearing thin for no clear reason. They're not mad at the third person. They're frustrated with themselves for agreeing to a life that doesn't match their emotional reality. What once felt manageable now feels suffocating. There are moments when they imagine telling the truth, not to anyone else, but to themselves. Moments where they wonder what it would feel like to stop pretending, to admit they didn't move on just because they wanted to. And those moments are terrifying, because once truth is named, alignment is required, and alignment means change. In next part, Spirit reveals why guilt, pressure, and the fear of real loss are starting to change how your person sees the stakes. Spirit shows guilt surfacing now, not dramatic guilt, not emotional outbursts, but quiet self-awareness. Your person is beginning to recognize the emotional cost of staying silent. They see how their lack of presence affects the third person. They feel the weight of performing commitment without emotional honesty, and that creates internal conflict because they don't want to hurt anyone. But here's the shift. They're starting to realize that avoiding pain is no longer possible. No matter what they do, someone will be affected. And for the first time, they're considering that staying exactly where they are might actually be the most harmful option of all. During this phase, your person may seem distant or distracted. This isn't them pulling away from connection. This is them confronting themselves. They're spending more time in their head, replaying choices, questioning assumptions, and realizing they underestimated how deeply you impacted their emotional growth. With you, they were exposed to a level of depth they had never been asked to sustain before. That exposure expanded them, even if they ran from it at the time. And now that expansion can't be undone. Spirit wants you to notice something important. Your growth has continued without them. You're no longer operating from the same emotional wounds. You've learned how to hold yourself without answers. You're no longer seeking validation or clarity from their behavior. And that shift is huge. Your person feels it. They sense that you're no longer emotionally available for indecision, that you're not holding space for confusion anymore. And that awareness introduces something new into their internal process. The possibility of real loss. There's a quiet realization forming that time doesn't pause for emotional processing. While they've been wrestling internally, life has kept moving. And that realization brings seriousness, not panic. They're starting to understand that clarity delayed can become clarity denied. This doesn't mean immediate action, but it does raise the stakes. The situation no longer feels theoretical. It feels consequential. Spirit shows your person standing at an internal threshold. On one side is familiarity, predictability, and emotional suppression. On the other side is uncertainty, disruption, and honesty. Neither path feels easy, but only one feels aligned. They're not stepping forward yet, but they're no longer comfortable standing still. This in-between space is tense, uncomfortable, transformative. Spirit asks you to stay unattached to how this unfolds. Attachment pulls you back into an emotional role you've already outgrown. Your peace isn't dependent on their readiness. Your clarity doesn't come from their decisions. What aligns will meet you in alignment. What resists will fall away on its own. In next part, Spirit reveals the emotional peak, where avoidance loses control and truth becomes unavoidable. Spirit moves this message into the emotional peak, the moment where inner pressure can no longer be postponed or intellectualized. Your person has reached a point where awareness is no longer passive. It's active. It shows up in their body, their breath, their inability to fully rest. They're realizing they can't think their way out of this. Logic isn't strong enough to override their heart anymore. The resistance they relied on for years is weakening, not because they chose to drop it, but because it can't contain what they feel. Externally, life may look the same. Routines continue. Responsibilities are met. But internally, everything feels off, like they're living out of sync with themselves, present in body, absent in spirit. That dissonance creates urgency without direction. They almost speak the truth, then stop, almost make a decision, then retreat, almost admit what they feel, then minimize it. These aren't failures. They're proof that fear is losing its grip. Spirit reveals that you've shifted from being a memory to being a reference point. Not fantasy, not idealization, but resonance. A standard for what emotional truth actually feels like. This realization strips away excuses. Your person is confronting a deep fear, not of losing you, but of exposure, of admitting they weren't ready, of acknowledging how much they avoided. And that fear keeps them quiet, but it no longer keeps them comfortable. They're starting to understand that choosing nothing is still a choice, and it costs them their peace. There's also a growing awareness of emotional time, not clock time, but the understanding that some moments don't reset. Some connections don't wait forever. This brings gravity to their decisions. They feel heavier now, more meaningful. Spirit emphasizes that your energy has become steady and clear. You're no longer reacting. You're anchored. And that steadiness removes the option of returning to confusion. If they ever approach you again, it won't be with half-truths. They feel that. An internal breaking point is approaching. Not explosive, but decisive. A moment where suppressing truth hurts more than facing it. They're not there yet, but they're close enough to feel it. Spirit asks you to stay rooted in yourself. Don't anticipate confessions. Don't prepare for outcomes. Don't step back into uncertainty. What's real doesn't need to be chased. Truth reshapes everything it touches. If this message resonated deeply, write, "I claim my truth," in the comments. Stay till the end, because what unfolds next isn't prediction, it's alignment.